8 years ago, my sister spun a web of lies so toxic that my parents erased me from their will and threw me out into a freezing winter night. I spent every day since then building my own wealth and ensuring I would never need them again. I assumed they had forgotten I existed. Then my phone rang at 2 in the morning. My family was on the verge of total collapse, and suddenly the daughter they discarded was the only one who could save them from federal prison. My name is Rachel, 33 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant and corporate liquidator in Chicago. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to set a firm boundary with toxic family members. It was a Tuesday at 2 in the morning when the glowing screen of my phone shattered the darkness of my bedroom. The caller ID displayed a Connecticut area code I had not seen in nearly a decade. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. I had spent 8 years meticulously carving out a successful life far away from my parents and their obsession with status. But a late-night call usually meant one of two things: death or ruin. My professional curiosity won out over my resentment. I answered the phone without a word. "Rachel, you need to get on a plane right now, my mother," Barbara screamed into the receiver. There was no greeting, no asking how I had been for the past 8 years. Just the familiar, shrill panic of a woman losing control of her perfect image. "Hello to you too, mother," I replied, keeping my voice entirely flat. "It is 2 in the morning. Listen to me," she gasped, her breath hitching. "Your father is going to federal prison if you do not get here now. The company is going under. They are threatening to take everything." I sat up in bed looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Chicago skyline. My parents owned a massive import business. They were wealthy, arrogant, and seemingly untouchable. The idea of them facing federal charges piqued my interest. "Call a lawyer, Mom," I said calmly. "I am an accountant, not a defense attorney. We have lawyers." She snapped, the desperation bleeding through the phone line. "We need you. We need your financial expertise. Rachel, please. If you do not come, we will lose the house. We will lose everything." I ended the call, tossed my phone onto the mattress, and walked to my closet. I did not pack out of a sense of familial duty or lingering love. I packed because, as a corporate liquidator, I specialized in dismantling ruined companies. And I wanted to see the exact moment my family realized their golden empire had turned to dust. The flight to Connecticut was turbulent and cold. I rented a car at the airport and drove through the familiar winding roads of my hometown. Dawn was just breaking when I pulled up to the sprawling gated estate. The house was a massive brick mansion with manicured hedges and a circular driveway. It was the exact same house I had been banished from 8 years ago, with nothing but a duffel bag and a few $100s to my name. I parked my rental car next to my father's luxury sedan and walked up to the heavy oak double doors. Before I could even reach out to ring the bell, the door swung open. My father, William, stood there in a wrinkled dress shirt, his usually immaculate hair completely disheveled. His face was pale and drawn, but his eyes still held that same demanding authority I remembered so well. He did not pull me into a hug. He did not say he was glad to see me. He did not even offer a basic hello. "You took long enough," he muttered, turning his back and expecting me to follow him inside. I stepped into the grand foyer. The crystal chandelier still hung from the vaulted ceiling. The expensive oil paintings still lined the halls. It all looked perfectly intact, completely hiding the financial rot that was apparently consuming them from the inside. I followed my father into the massive custom kitchen. My mother was pacing nervously by the marble island, clutching a coffee mug with shaking hands. When she saw me, her eyes immediately darted to my designer coat and the expensive leather briefcase I carried. I could see her assessing my net worth, calculating exactly how much she could bleed from me to save herself. "Rachel," she said, her voice tight and commanding. "Thank God, we do not have much time." I set my briefcase on the cold marble counter and crossed my arms. "All right, I am here. What exactly is going on that warrants a panicked call in the middle of the night?" My father did not offer an explanation. Instead, he reached into a leather folder and slid a thick stack of legal documents across the smooth marble surface toward me. He tapped a gold pen aggressively against the top page. "Sign these," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument or discussion. I looked down at the paperwork. My trained eyes scanned the dense legal jargon in seconds. These were not audit requests or consulting contracts. They were asset transfer agreements and collateral pledges. "You want me to sign over my assets," I stated, making sure I understood the sheer audacity of his demand. "We need liquid capital," William said, his voice hard and uncompromising. "The company owes $3 million in back taxes and immediate creditor claims. The federal authorities have given us a hard deadline. If that money is not wired into their escrow account by 8 o'clock this morning, the feds will seize the business and issue arrest warrants." I picked up the top document and read the specific clauses. He had clearly done his research. The documents explicitly listed my Chicago penthouse and my entire retirement portfolio as collateral for a high-interest bridge loan. He wanted to gamble my life savings to pay off his corporate debts. "Let me get this straight," I said, looking up at him with absolute calm. "You have not spoken to me in 8 years. You cut me out of your will. You told your friends I was a disgrace. And now you want me to leverage my home and my financial future to bail out your failing company." "You are family," my mother interjected quickly, stepping closer to the island. "Families help each other in times of crisis. You have plenty of money, Rachel. We checked your firm's public filings. You can afford to do this for us." "You have to sign it," William demanded, leaning over the counter to intimidate me. "The bank needs the signed collateral agreements processed immediately. We need that $3 million today, or I am going to jail." I looked at the gold pen resting on the documents. Then I looked at the parents who had thrown me away like garbage. They honestly believed I would sacrifice the empire I built just to save theirs. I calmly picked up the gold pen resting on top of the collateral agreements. My father leaned forward, a greedy glint of relief flashing in his bloodshot eyes. He thought he had won. He thought the heavy atmosphere of panic and the ingrained habits of childhood obedience would force my hand. Instead, I placed the cap back on the pen, gripping it firmly before tossing it directly into the stainless steel sink across the kitchen island. It landed with a sharp metallic clatter that echoed through the massive room. "I am not signing anything," I said, my voice steady and entirely devoid of emotion. My father stood frozen for a fraction of a second before his face flushed a deep, violent shade of red. The veins in his neck bulged against his wrinkled collar. "What do you mean you are not signing?" he bellowed, slamming both hands down on the marble counter. "I just told you the federal agents are going to freeze everything at 8 o'clock. We do not have time for your stubbornness. This is life or death for this family. You kicked me out with nothing but a duffel bag 8 years ago, and now you want my net worth," I asked, locking my gaze onto his. "You honestly brought me here in the middle of the night to demand that I sacrifice the penthouse I paid for and the retirement fund I built just to cover your catastrophic failures." Barbara stepped forward, inserting herself between my father and the kitchen island. She put on the same wounded, fragile expression she used whenever she was caught in a lie. "Rachel, how can you be so cruel at a time like this?" she whimpered, clutching her chest. "We gave you life. We raised you in this beautiful home. We paid for your private schools and your first 2 years of college before you became so impossible to deal with. You owe us for everything you are. You would not have that fancy Chicago firm or that penthouse if we had not instilled such a strong work ethic in you." I looked at my mother, feeling absolutely nothing. Her ability to twist reality was almost impressive, but I was no longer the scared 25-year-old girl desperate for her approval. "I owe you absolutely nothing," I replied, enunciating every syllable with clinical precision. "You legally disowned me. I have the notarized paperwork framed inside my home office. It was a very thorough job by your expensive attorneys. You severed all financial and familial ties. You made sure I would not get a single cent of your estate. By your own legal definition, I am a complete stranger standing in your kitchen. Why would a stranger pay off your $3 million debt?" "This is not a courtroom," William shouted, pacing frantically behind my mother. "This is reality. The business is the family legacy. It is your legacy. You cannot just stand there and let it burn to the ground. My legacy, I scoffed, shaking my head at the sheer delusion. My legacy was stripped from me the night you changed the locks on this house. I am not a shareholder in your import company. I am not a board member. And I am certainly not a guarantor for your gross financial negligence. I picked up the top sheet of the legal documents and scanned the summary of their liabilities. My forensic accountant instincts automatically kicked in, dissecting their ruin. $3 million in immediate federal tax debt and creditor claims does not just happen overnight, I stated, tossing the paper back onto the pile. This means you have been dodging the IRS for at least 5 quarters. You hid assets. You ignored the warning letters. You ignored the final notices. You waited until the federal agents were literally drafting the seizure warrants before you picked up the phone to call the daughter you threw away. This is not a sudden crisis. This is a systemic, deliberate fraud that finally caught up to you. You are always so cold, Rachel, Barbara cried, her voice cracking as she tried to squeeze out a single tear. So calculating and heartless. We made a mistake 8 years ago, fine. We admit it. But we are your parents. You cannot just watch us be destroyed. My friends at the club will find out. The charity boards will strip me of my positions. If we go bankrupt, we will be laughingstocks in this town. I cannot survive that kind of humiliation. I stared at her, genuinely amazed by her priorities. You care more about losing your country club membership than the fact that your husband is facing federal prison time, I observed coldly. Your priorities have not changed at all. You are still the same shallow, terrified people who care more about optics than reality. William lunged forward, grabbing my forearm with a tight, desperate grip. You listen to me, he snarled, his breath smelling of stale coffee and panic. You are going to sign these papers right now, or I swear to you I will make you regret coming here. I looked down at his hand gripping my jacket, then slowly raised my eyes to meet his. Let go of me, I warned, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Or my next call will be to the local police to report an assault, and the feds can pick you up from the county jail instead of your mansion. He hesitated, the sheer authority in my tone breaking through his rage. Slowly his fingers loosened and he stepped back, panting heavily. The grand kitchen fell into a suffocating silence, broken only by the sound of my father ragged breathing and my mother's soft, theatrical sobs. I reached for the handle of my briefcase, ready to turn my back on them and walk out the door forever. Then the sharp, rhythmic clicking of expensive heels on the hardwood floor echoed from the hallway. The sound was casual, unhurried, and completely out of place in a house currently drowning in panic. I turned my head just as a figure stepped into the harsh light of the kitchen. Brittany walked in wearing a luxurious silk robe, her hair perfectly styled, even at this hour, as if she had just stepped out of a salon rather than her bed. She was holding a delicate porcelain cup of espresso, taking a slow, deliberate sip. She looked entirely disconnected from the reality of the $3 million federal crisis threatening to rip the roof off her home. She lowered her espresso cup, her lips curving into a familiar, arrogant smirk as her eyes locked onto mine. Still holding a grudge, sis? I stared at my younger sister, analyzing her completely unbothered posture. While our parents were hyperventilating over federal prison sentences and frozen bank accounts, Brittany was acting like she had just been slightly inconvenienced by a delayed room service order. She adjusted the belt of her silk robe, completely ignoring the stack of life-ruining legal documents resting mere inches from her manicured hands. I am not holding a grudge, Brittany, I replied, my voice steady and deliberate. I am holding my boundaries. There is a significant legal and financial difference. Brittany rolled her eyes, letting out a sharp, condescending laugh. She set her porcelain cup on the marble counter and leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. Please, you have been pouting for 8 years because Mom and Dad finally saw through your little act. You are just enjoying this moment because you think it makes you look superior. You are still furious that they caught you stealing my business plan in college and rightfully cut you out of the inheritance. This whole icy professional routine is just your way of throwing a tantrum. Barbara immediately stepped to Brittany's side, placing a protective hand on her younger daughter's shoulder. Your sister is right, Rachel. We had to do what we did back then. You broke our trust. You tried to ruin Brittany's future because you could not stand that she was the creative genius of the family. We had no choice but to rewrite the will and protect the company's legacy for the child who actually deserved it. I looked back and forth between the two of them, genuinely marveling at the depth of their shared delusion. It was a fascinating psychological phenomenon to witness in real time. They had repeated the lie so often that it had become their absolute truth. My thesis, I corrected sharply, slicing through their fabricated narrative. It was my capstone accounting thesis. You failed your senior year finance seminar, Brittany. You failed it because you spent the entire semester partying in Miami on Dad's credit card. When you realized you were not going to graduate, you sneaked into my dorm room, accessed my laptop, and copied my 70-page financial modeling project. You slapped your name on the title page and handed it to Dad, claiming it was your brilliant master plan to expand the family import business. That is a complete lie, Brittany gasped, pressing a hand to her chest in mock horror. Dad, tell her to stop making things up. I did not break eye contact with my sister. You cried those exact same fake tears 8 years ago. I continued, my voice echoing off the high ceilings of the kitchen. You cried, and you told them I was jealous of your sudden business acumen. But the numbers do not lie, Brittany. They never do. I begged you, William, I said, turning my gaze to my father. I begged you to let me hire a digital forensic specialist. I told you that a simple audit of the file creation dates and the metadata would prove unequivocally that I wrote every single word of that document months before she even knew what a supply chain was. My father crossed his arms, his face tightening. We did not need a computer expert to tell us what we could see with our own eyes. Brittany presented that plan with passion. You were just being vindictive. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. I was demanding due process. And what was your response to my demand for proof? You told me I was a toxic, jealous monster. You told me I was dead to you. You packed my clothes into a single duffel bag, drove me to the downtown bus station at 2 in the morning in the middle of a blizzard, and drove away. You changed the locks on the house the very next day and stripped my name from the family trust. All to protect a plagiarism scheme, because Brittany was your golden child and could do no wrong. Barbara gripped the edge of the kitchen island. You are living in the past, Rachel. What happened 8 years ago is irrelevant now. We are talking about the survival of this family today. It is entirely relevant, I snapped, slamming my hand flat against the marble counter, making my mother flinch. It is the core of everything happening in this room right now. You cut me out of the will because you chose to believe a comfortable lie over an uncomfortable truth. You chose to hand the keys of your empire to a woman who had to steal her college assignments because she lacked the discipline to do the work herself. And now you have the absolute nerve to stand there and wonder why your business is collapsing under the weight of $3 million in unpaid federal taxes. You put a fraud in charge, and now you are paying the price. Brittany's smug expression finally cracked, her face contorted with genuine fury. She took a step toward me, pointing an accusing finger. You think you are so smart just because you play with spreadsheets all day in Chicago. You know nothing about running a real business. We hit a rough patch. That is all. The market shifted and we had some unexpected liabilities. It happens to everyone. Unexpected liabilities do not trigger emergency federal seizures. I fired back, leaning in close. Fraud does. Embezzlement does. Gross financial misconduct does. You did not hit a rough patch. You drove this company straight off a cliff, and now you want to use my bank accounts as your personal airbag. It is not going to happen. You wanted the inheritance, Brittany. You fought dirty for it. You lied for it. Well, congratulations. You got exactly what you wanted. You inherited the entire company, the assets, the legacy, and the millions of dollars in federal debt. It is all yours. William's face turned a dangerous, mottled purple. The veins in his forehead throbbed as he watched his carefully constructed reality being dismantled piece by piece. He could not argue with the logic, and he could not deny the impending doom waiting for him at 8 o'clock. His panic boiled over into blind, unadulterated rage. He lunged forward and slammed his heavy fist down on the kitchen island with such explosive force that Brittany's espresso cup rattled in its saucer. "The will is my money," he roared, his voice echoing violently through the grand house. I decide who gets what. I decide who inherits the legacy. But saving this family is your obligation. I have no obligation to a corporation I do not own, I stated, my voice slicing through the heavy air of the kitchen. You want to talk about reality, William? Let us talk about the math. Math is my reality. I stepped closer to the marble island, tapping my index finger against the stack of legal documents. Your import company has been highly lucrative for 3 decades. You have established supply chains, solid vendor relationships, and consistent profit margins. A business like that does not suddenly wake up one morning owing $3 million to the federal government. That kind of catastrophic deficit requires sustained systemic failure. It requires someone actively cooking the books, diverting funds, and ignoring certified public accountant warnings for years. So before you demand that I hand over my penthouse and my retirement portfolio, I want to know exactly how this happened. Where did the money go? William swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing above his tight collar. He glanced nervously at Barbara, who suddenly found the intricate pattern of the marble countertop absolutely fascinating. Neither of them spoke. They had spent the last hours screaming about family loyalty and legacy, but the moment I demanded actual financial accountability, they turned into frightened children. Well, I pressed, looking directly at my father. You are the chief executive officer. You sign off on the quarterly tax filings. You approve the vendor payments. The IRS does not just seize assets without sending dozens of certified letters first. Who hid the letters? Who falsified the asset reports? If you want my money, I demand the truth. Why does this company owe $3 million overnight? The silence in the kitchen stretched out thick and suffocating. I watched my family squirm under the weight of my professional interrogation. I was no longer the discarded daughter they could bully into submission. I was a forensic accountant, and I could smell corporate rot from a mile away. Before my father could formulate another empty excuse, the heavy oak door leading from the formal dining room swung open with a quiet creak. A tall man stepped into the harsh, bright light of the kitchen. It was Terrence Brittany's husband of 4 years. He was 34 years old, a brilliant financial mind, and the chief financial officer of my parents' company. Terrence was an African-American man who had worked twice as hard as anyone else to earn his credentials, only to marry into a family that viewed him more as a corporate accessory than a son-in-law. He stood near the doorway wearing a crumpled dress shirt and a loosened tie. Deep dark bags hung under his eyes, suggesting he had not slept in days. He carried a battered, worn leather briefcase in his left hand, his knuckles white from gripping the handle so tightly. Terrence took one look at the scene in the kitchen. My father red-faced and sweating, my mother clutching her chest, me standing cold and detached beside the legal documents. His jaw clenched, a muscle feathering along his cheekline. He knew exactly what they were trying to do to me. He radiated an overwhelming sense of exhaustion and quiet despair. The moment the door clicked shut behind Terrence, the entire energy in the room shifted violently. Brittany, who had just spent the last 10 minutes sneering at me with arrogant superiority, underwent an instantaneous and chilling transformation. Her smug expression vanished in the blink of an eye. Her shoulders slumped, her lower lip began to tremble, and her eyes widened with manufactured terror. She let out a sharp theatrical gasp and stumbled backward, pressing herself against my mother's side as if seeking physical protection from an invisible monster. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with sudden violent sobs. The performance was breathtaking in its audacity. There were no real tears, only the loud, wet sounds of a woman desperate to control the narrative. Barbara immediately wrapped her arms around her golden child, glaring at Terrence as if he had just broken into their home to harm them. William puffed out his chest, stepping defensively in front of his wife and youngest daughter, forming a physical barricade against the exhausted man by the door. "I cannot look at him," Brittany wailed, her voice muffled behind her perfectly manicured hands. "Make him leave, Mom. Please make him leave. I cannot bear to be in the same room with him after what he has done to us." I watched this bizarre pantomime unfold with absolute clinical detachment. I looked at Terrence, who simply closed his eyes and let out a long, defeated sigh, as if he had seen this exact script play out 100 times before. He did not defend himself. He just stood there, anchored by the weight of a truth no one in this house wanted to hear. "What is going on here?" I demanded, my voice cutting sharply through Brittany's fake sobbing. "Someone explain this right now." Brittany slowly lowered her hands from her face. Her makeup was miraculously undisturbed. She pointed a trembling diamond-ringed finger directly at her husband's chest. Her eyes locked onto mine, burning with a toxic mixture of desperation and malicious intent. She was ready to throw the father of her child directly under the bus to save her own skin. "He did it!" Brittany sobbed, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch that echoed off the custom cabinetry. "He is the chief financial officer, Rachel. He is the one who controlled all the accounts. He locked us out of the ledgers. We trusted him because he is family, and he used that trust to destroy us." Terrence opened his eyes and stared at his wife, his expression hardening into a mask of pure disgust. Brittany took a step forward, clinging dramatically to the edge of the kitchen island. Terrence embezzled it. "The FBI is coming for him, and if we do not pay the fines tomorrow, the family name is ruined." "It is the truth, Rachel," my father bellowed, stepping forward as if physical proximity could force me to swallow his lies. "We trusted him. I brought him into this family, gave him the chief financial officer position, and this is how he repays us. He made unauthorized high-risk investments. When the market turned and those investments went south, he started shifting corporate funds to cover his tracks. He hid the massive losses from the executive board and drained our operating capital. We were completely blind to it," Barbara added, wiping a perfectly dry eye with the back of her hand. "He manipulated the quarterly reports. He smiled at us across the dinner table while he bled our legacy dry. The federal agents are targeting him, but since the business is in our name, they are threatening to seize our personal assets to cover his crimes. We are victims here." I slowly turned my gaze away from my hysterical family and looked at Terrence. He had not moved a single inch from his spot near the doorway. He did not shout in his own defense. He did not call them liars. He just stood there in the suffocating heat of that grand kitchen, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter under the pressure. His eyes burned with a devastating mixture of profound disgust and absolute soul-crushing despair. He looked like a man who had spent years trying to keep a sinking ship afloat, only to be chained to the anchor by the very people he was trying to save. I took a deep, steadying breath. The emotional, discarded daughter retreated entirely into the shadows of my mind, replaced by the clinical, ruthless forensic accountant who dismantled corrupt corporate empires for a living. If my family wanted to play a game of high-stakes financial fraud, they were dealing with the wrong opponent. "Is that so?" I said, my voice dropping to a calm, terrifying register that immediately silenced my mother's fake sniffling. "He made bad investments. He hid them from the board." "That is a fascinating narrative, William. But let us look at the actual mechanics of this supposed master plan." I walked slowly around the marble island, keeping my eyes locked dead on my father. If Terrence was embezzling corporate funds to cover bad investments, how exactly did he bypass the dual authorization mandate required for corporate wire transfers over $50,000? Your company bylaws mandate that the chief executive officer must co-sign any major capital movement. Did he forge your digital signature, or did you blindly hand over your secure banking authorization token to your son-in-law? William blinked, his face losing some of its aggressive flush as he stumbled over the technicality. He is the financial officer. He found a back door in the accounting software. You know how these tech-savvy guys are. They know how to hide things from the system. A back door in an enterprise resource planning system, I countered, raising a skeptical eyebrow. That is highly unlikely without triggering an automated security flag to the third-party auditors you are legally required to employ. But let us pretend he is a master hacker. Let us talk about the IRS. You claim you owe $3 million in back taxes and federal fines. Under Internal Revenue Code, Section 6672, the trust fund recovery penalty applies to anyone responsible for withholding payroll taxes. If Terrence was stealing operating capital, he would have had to halt payroll tax deposits to free up cash. The IRS sends automated warnings after one missed quarter. Are you telling me that as the owner of the company, you ignored federal tax notices for over a year? He intercepted the mail. Brittany blurted out, her voice shrill and desperate as she tried to rescue our father from my interrogation. He kept the letters from reaching Dad's desk. He redirected the emails. He is a criminal, Rachel. He planned all of this. I turned my predatory gaze onto my sister. He intercepted federal mail, a federal offense on top of massive corporate embezzlement. Fascinating. And where exactly did he put the money, Brittany? If he stole $3 million, there must be a massive paper trail. Did he use offshore holding companies in the Cayman Islands? Did he funnel the stolen capital through anonymous shell corporations in Delaware? Did he convert corporate cash into untraceable cryptocurrency assets? Tell me, how did he wash the funds? Brittany opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her eyes darted frantically to our father, looking for a lifeline that he could not provide. She twisted the silk belt of her robe, her manufactured confidence evaporating under the spotlight of basic logic. I do not know how he did it, she stammered, her voice dropping an octave. He just took it. Why are you interrogating us like we are the criminals? He is the thief. You should be screaming at him. You should be forcing him to fix this. Because I said, my tone dangerously soft, I am a professional auditor. And the very first rule of auditing is that the numbers always leave a footprint. But more importantly, people leave footprints. Massive financial crimes require massive lifestyle changes. I stopped pacing and took a long, deliberate look at the people standing in front of me. I looked at William, wearing a custom-tailored Italian dress shirt even in the middle of a late-night panic. I looked at Barbara, whose neck was adorned with a diamond tennis necklace she certainly did not sleep in. Then my eyes settled squarely on my sister. Brittany was crossing her arms defensively across her chest. The motion drew my immediate attention to her left wrist. Glistening under the harsh, recessed kitchen lights was a brand-new limited edition rose gold Rolex. It was a timepiece that required a massive waitlist and a small fortune to acquire. Resting on the leather bar stool right next to her espresso cup was a pristine Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag, a handbag that easily retailed for over $100,000 on the secondary market. I slowly shifted my gaze back to the doorway. Terrence was still standing exactly where he had been. He was wearing an off-the-rack suit that looked like it had been dry cleaned one too many times. His dress shoes were visibly scuffed at the toes, and in his left hand, the supposed criminal mastermind who had successfully embezzled $3 million was gripping a battered 5-year-old leather briefcase. The handle was literally held together by a thick strip of black duct tape. I stared at the strip of black duct tape holding the chief financial officer's briefcase together. Then my eyes flicked back to the $100,000 handbag resting casually on the counter next to my sister. A Himalayan crocodile Birkin. I stated, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the kitchen. And a brand new rose gold Rolex day date. Let me ask you a very simple question, Brittany. If Terrence stole $3 million, why are you wearing the loot while your husband looks like he skipped lunch to afford the subway fare? William immediately stepped in front of the Birkin bag, as if his physical body could hide the tangible evidence of his daughter's reckless spending habits. Those were gifts, he barked, pointing a thick, accusing finger at me. I bought those for her birthday last year to celebrate a major account she landed. They have absolutely nothing to do with company funds. Gifts from a corporation that has not paid its federal taxes in 5 quarters, I shot back, calculating the luxury tax implications in real time. That makes them physical assets purchased with misappropriated federal funds, William. The criminal division of the IRS will not care if those items were wrapped in a shiny bow. When they raid this house tomorrow, they will seize that watch right off her wrist. Barbara realized instantly that bullying and financial logic were failing spectacularly. The numbers were not on their side, and I was not breaking under my father's intimidation. She needed a new angle. She bypassed her husband and walked around the marble island, approaching me with her hands clasped tightly together in a posture of desperate maternal pleading. She knew my weakness had always been a rigid sense of fairness, a deep desire to protect the vulnerable. She decided to exploit it with surgical precision. Rachel, please. Barbara whispered, her voice cracking with manufactured grief as she looked up at me. Stop treating this family crisis like one of your cold corporate spreadsheets. We are not talking about line items and tax codes. We are talking about human lives. We are talking about little Leo. Leo, my 4-year-old nephew. A child I had only seen in passing through social media posts that former acquaintances occasionally forwarded to me. I had never met him, but I knew he existed. I knew he was an innocent boy caught in a web of toxic narcissism. What does Leo have to do with you demanding my retirement fund? I asked, bracing myself for whatever vile emotional manipulation she was about to deploy. Barbara took another step closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial, desperate pitch. Think about that innocent little boy, Rachel. Think about what will happen to him tomorrow morning if you walk out that door. If you do not sign these papers and pledge your assets tonight, the federal agents are going to raid this house. They are going to raid the corporate headquarters. And they are going to arrest Terrence in front of his son. Barbara turned her head, casting a theatrical, pitying look at Terrence, who was still standing rigidly by the kitchen door. Then she looked back at me, her eyes widening to emphasize the terrifying gravity of her next words. If you do not sign, your nephew's father goes to federal prison, she hissed, her voice dripping with calculated malice. You know exactly how the justice system in this country works, Rachel. You are really going to let a black man take the fall in the federal courts just because you are feeling petty about something that happened 8 years ago? The absolute silence that followed her statement was deafening. Even William seemed to hold his breath. I stared at my mother, the air completely leaving my lungs. It took a few seconds for my brain to process the sheer, unadulterated evil of what she had just said. She was not just asking me for money anymore. She was holding a hostage. You are weaponizing his race, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, completely horrified by the absolute depths they had sunk to. You are actively banking on the fact that a federal prosecutor will look at a black chief financial officer and immediately presume guilt. You set him up. We did not set anyone up. Brittany shrieked from the background, her face contorting with panic. He did it. He signed the ledgers. The digital proof is in the accounting system. The proof you put there, I countered, my eyes never leaving my mother's face. You funneled $3 million out of the company to fund your luxury lifestyle, and when the IRS finally knocked on the door, you realized you needed a fall guy. And who better to take the blame than the outsider? The man who married into the family. The man who already has to work twice as hard just to prove he belongs in your privileged country club world. I looked over at Terrence. His head was bowed, his eyes fixed firmly on the hardwood floor. He was not looking at his wife, or his in-laws, or me. He looked utterly defeated, a man who realized long ago that he was trapped in a cage with starving wolves. He knew exactly what they were doing. They had handed him the title of CFO not as a promotion, but as a liability shield. When the golden child inevitably crashed the company, Terrence would be the one wearing the handcuffs. My parents were not just desperate, they were monsters. They were entirely willing to let an innocent man be racially profiled, prosecuted, and locked in a federal penitentiary for a decade, stripping a 4-year-old boy of his father simply to cover up Brittany's rampant, careless fraud. They were attempting to use my morality, my progressive values, and my empathy against me. They wanted me to feel so terrified for Terrence's safety and Leo's future that I would blindly sign over $3 million to make the problem vanish. We are trying to save Leo's family, Barbara cried, clutching my forearm with her manicured fingers. Her grip was surprisingly strong, fueled by absolute desperation. You are the one destroying it. If you sign the collateral agreement, the bank wire goes through, the IRS gets paid, and the federal investigation disappears. No one goes to jail. Terrence stays with Leo. Brittany stays out of trouble. The family survives. It all comes down to you, Rachel. You hold the pen. You have the power to save a black man from a rigged justice system. Or you can walk away and let him be ruined. Do not let your pride turn you into a monster. I looked down at my mother's hand gripping my jacket. The manipulation was so expertly crafted, so deeply insidious, that for a split second I actually felt the heavy, suffocating weight of the guilt she was trying to force onto my shoulders. If I walked away, Terrence would face the full, terrifying weight of a federal indictment. He would be fighting a rigged battle against wealthy white in-laws who had the resources to fabricate a paper trail leading directly to his desk. I peeled my mother's fingers off my arm one by one, tossing her hand aside as if it were coated in poison. The sheer depravity of their scheme made my stomach churn. I needed to get out of this room. I needed to breathe air that was not polluted by their toxic criminal desperation. I backed away from the kitchen island, staring at the three people who shared my blood but lacked a single ounce of basic humanity. I peeled my mother's fingers off my arm one by one, tossing her hand aside as if it were coated in poison. The sheer depravity of their scheme made my stomach churn. I needed to get out of this room. I needed to breathe air that was not polluted by their toxic criminal desperation. I backed away from the kitchen island, staring at the three people who shared my blood, but lacked a single ounce of basic humanity. I need to use the restroom, I announced, cutting off whatever fabricated plea my mother was preparing to launch next. My voice sounded remarkably steady for someone whose chest felt like it was being compressed by a vice. William checked his expensive watch, his face twisting with renewed impatience. "You do not have time for a break, Rachel. The bank's open in a few hours. We need to process the asset transfers now." I did not even bother giving him a response. I turned on my heel and walked out of the kitchen, letting the heavy oak door swing shut behind me. The sudden silence of the grand hallway wrapped around me like a physical blanket. Away from the glaring, recessed lighting and the suffocating heat of their panic, the mansion felt like a tomb. I leaned back against the cool, patterned wallpaper, closing my eyes and forcing air into my lungs. I was a professional who routinely navigated high-stakes corporate liquidations, hostile board takeovers, and federal fraud investigations. I had sat across conference tables from ruthless executives who would sell their own grandmothers for a bump in quarterly earnings. Yet none of those boardroom sociopaths held a candle to the absolute moral bankruptcy of my own parents. They were actively weaponizing the systemic racial biases of the federal justice system to protect their spoiled, thieving daughter. They were entirely prepared to sacrifice Terrence and leave a 4-year-old boy fatherless, using my conscience as the funding mechanism. I opened my eyes and looked down the long, shadowed corridor. The walls were lined with large, framed family portraits. There was William looking distinguished. There was Barbara wearing her country club smile. And there was Brittany, the golden child, radiating an air of untouchable privilege. I was conspicuously absent from every single frame, erased from their history the moment I demanded accountability 8 years ago. Now they only wanted me back to serve as a human ATM. I pushed myself off the wall, intending to head toward the guest bathroom to splash cold water on my face and strategize my exit. Before I could take a second step, a shadow detached itself from the alcove near the formal dining room. I froze, my forensic instincts flaring. It was Terrence. He must have slipped out the secondary kitchen door while my parents were busy hyperventilating over my refusal. He stood in the dim light of the hallway, checking over his shoulder to ensure the oak door remained firmly shut. His posture was entirely different from the defeated, broken man who had stood silently by the kitchen frame minutes earlier. Now stripped of his in-laws' predatory gaze, he moved with sharp, calculated urgency. "Rachel," he whispered, his voice low and raspy, carrying the rough edge of a man who had been screaming internally for months. I instinctively took a step back, my guard instantly raised. "Terrence, if you followed me out here to beg on their behalf, you are wasting your time. I am not signing over my assets to cover up a crime, regardless of how maliciously they are setting you up. You need to hire a criminal defense attorney immediately." "I am not asking you for money," he replied, closing the distance between us with quick, silent strides. "I am asking for an auditor." He stopped barely 2 feet away from me. Up close, the toll of marrying into my family was devastatingly apparent. The dark circles under his eyes looked like bruises. His skin was ashy with exhaustion, and the collar of his dress shirt was frayed at the edges, a stark contrast to the designer wardrobe my sister casually flaunted. He did not look like a corporate embezzler sitting on $3 million of stolen federal tax money. He looked like a prisoner of war who had finally found an open window. Terrence reached into the pocket of his trousers. His hand was shaking slightly, not from fear, but from raw adrenaline. He pulled out a small metallic object and reached out, pressing it firmly into the palm of my hand. His fingers curled my own digits tightly around it, ensuring I secured the item. I looked down at my closed fist. The cold, heavy edges of a solid-state encrypted USB drive pressed against my skin. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my voice hushed to match his volume. "Everything," Terrence answered, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my heart hammer against my ribs. "It is the real ledger. It is the unredacted corporate bank statements, the hidden wire transfers, the shadow accounts. I have been compiling this drive for the last 6 months, ever since I realized they were actively blocking my access to the executive financial servers." I gripped the USB drive tightly. Why give this to me? Why not take this straight to the authorities? "Because they are the authorities, Rachel," he urged, the desperation bleeding through his suppressed tone. "William plays golf with the regional director of the banking commission. Barbara serves on charity boards with 2 federal judges. If I walk into a field office holding this drive, a black man accused of stealing $3 million by a prominent, wealthy, well-connected white family, they will arrest me before I even finish my sentence. The narrative is already written. William hired a private digital firm to forge my signature on the authorization logs. They manufactured an entire trail of digital breadcrumbs leading directly to my office terminal." I stared at him, the horrifying reality of his situation clicking into place. As a forensic accountant, I knew exactly how easily a compromised IT department could manipulate metadata to frame a scapegoat. They had not just planned to throw him under the bus. They had built the bus, painted his name on the side, and hired the driver. Terrence leaned in closer, his voice vibrating with a terrifying quiet urgency. "I didn't take a dime. She used corporate accounts to fund a gambling addiction and buy luxury real estate. They are using me as the fall guy because the feds will believe it. Please look at the files." I looked down at the small metal drive resting in my palm. The weight of it was negligible, but the gravity of what it contained was staggering. This was not just a collection of financial records. It was a lifeline. It was the only shield standing between an innocent man and a federal prison sentence. I closed my fingers around the drive and slipped it deep into the pocket of my blazer, ensuring it was entirely concealed against the lining. I met Terrence's eyes and gave him a single, barely perceptible nod. I did not offer empty promises or sympathetic platitudes. As an auditor, my currency was proof, and he had just handed me the vault. I turned away from him and walked back toward the kitchen doors, leaving the vulnerability and shock behind in the shadows of the hallway. When I pushed those heavy oak doors open and stepped back into the harsh lighting of the kitchen, I was no longer a daughter navigating a toxic family reunion. I was an apex predator stepping into an enclosure full of trapped, desperate prey. My parents had not moved from their defensive positions. William was frantically tapping his gold pen against the marble island, his eyes darting to the grandfather clock in the corner with increasing manic energy. Barbara was twisting a linen napkin between her hands, her face a mask of manufactured anxiety, as she prepared to launch another barrage of emotional manipulation. Brittany was leaning against the counter, her arms crossed, looking entirely too pleased with the performance she had just delivered. She thought the emotional ambush had worked. She thought she had successfully weaponized my conscience to write her a blank check. My presence commanded the room the moment the door clicked shut. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I walked slowly back to the island and stood directly across from my father. I picked up the stack of collateral agreements, feeling the thick, expensive paper between my fingers. William let out a heavy sigh of relief, reaching forward to slide the pen toward me. "Do not insult my intelligence by handing me a pen," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as a scalpel. I dropped the documents back onto the marble surface with a dismissive thud. "I told you once, and I will tell you one final time. I am not signing over my penthouse. I am not draining my retirement accounts to cover a blind debt based on your unverified accusations." William opened his mouth to launch into another tirade about family loyalty and federal raids, but I cut him off instantly. However, I continued my gaze locking onto him with unyielding intensity. I am willing to offer you a professional alternative. You claim you have the digital proof that your chief financial officer orchestrated a massive $3 million embezzlement scheme. You claim the trail leads directly to his desk and that you are the innocent victims of his betrayal. If that is the absolute truth, then you have absolutely nothing to hide from a certified forensic accountant. The kitchen fell dead silent. Barbara stopped twisting her napkin, her hands freezing in midair. Here is my counter-proposal, I announced, projecting my voice so every single word carried absolute authority. I will conduct a 12-hour emergency audit of your corporate books starting right this second. Give me unrestricted access to the raw data, the general ledgers, the unredacted bank statements, and the internal communication logs. I do not want your summarized quarterly reports. I do not want the curated spreadsheets you show your investors. I want the raw, unfiltered server access and the administrative passwords. If your narrative holds up, if my independent audit proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Terrence single-handedly bypassed the security protocols and embezzled those funds, I will pay the $3 million myself. I will wire the money directly to the IRS escrow account from my own personal portfolio before the federal agents ever set foot on your property. I paused, letting the magnitude of my offer sink in. I watched the greed warring with terror in my father's eyes. A guaranteed $3 million bailout was dangling right in front of him, but the cost was total transparency. But I added, lowering my voice to a lethal register. If I dig into those servers and find even one altered document, one offshore account tied to a luxury real estate purchase, or one authorized wire transfer signed by the chief executive officer to cover a gambling debt, the deal is completely off. If Terrence is innocent, you handle your own mess, and I walk out that door and never look back. Panic struck Brittany with the force of a physical blow. The smug satisfaction completely melted off her face, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. She stammered, taking a jerky step backward, as if I had just pulled a weapon on her. Her breathing grew shallow and rapid. "No!" She gasped, her voice shrill and trembling as she clutched the lapels of her silk robe. "You cannot do that! Dad, tell her she cannot do that. We do not have time for an audit. The servers are restricted. She is just trying to stall so the feds will arrest us." Brittany looked frantically at William, her eyes begging him to shut down my demand. She knew exactly what a 12-hour audit would uncover. She knew her poorly disguised paper trail would unravel under the scrutiny of a professional who actually knew where to look. She knew I would find the casino transfers, the designer purchases, and the fraudulent signatures in a matter of minutes. William stared at me. He looked at the sheer, unbending resolve in my posture and the absolute certainty in my eyes. The realization crashed down on him heavily. He finally understood that he could not bully me, he could not gaslight me, he could not manipulate my emotions or use a child's future to secure a blind bailout. He was dealing with a woman who held all the leverage and refused to play by his toxic rules. The desperate, panicked father act vanished completely. The mask slipped, revealing the ruthless, cornered businessman underneath. His eyes hardened into dark, malicious slits. He slowly picked up the gold pen from the counter, turning it over in his hands as he calculated his next move. He crossed a dangerous line, deciding that if he could not guilt me into submission, he would simply destroy my life to save his own. William's eyes narrowed, the last trace of paternal desperation evaporating like water on a hot stove. The frantic, sweating father vanished, replaced by the calculating, ruthless businessman who had built an import empire by stepping on whoever was in his way. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a second, significantly thinner manila folder. He tossed it onto the kitchen island next to the collateral agreements. It slid across the marble, stopping inches from my hands. "I did not want to do this, Rachel," he said, his voice dropping an octave, devoid of any emotional inflection. "I thought you would see reason. I thought you would remember who you are and where you came from. But if you insist on playing hardball, if you refuse to honor your obligations to this family, then I will use every tool at my disposal. I looked at the folder but did not touch it. What is this, William? I asked, my tone bored. A sudden manifestation of a long-lost conscience. It is a drafted legal complaint, he replied, crossing his arms over his chest. In the state of Connecticut, there are strict statutes regarding elder abandonment and neglect. It is a civil cause of action designed to protect aging parents from children who maliciously abandon their financial and moral responsibilities. It allows for significant damages, and more importantly, it requires public filing. I actually laughed. A short, sharp sound that echoed off the custom cabinetry. You are threatening to sue me for elder abandonment, I said, looking from my 58-year-old mother to my 60-year-old father. You play tennis 3 times a week, William. Barbara just returned from a spa retreat in Sedona. You are not destitute, frail seniors relying on me for survival. You are corporate executives facing federal tax evasion charges. No judge in this state would entertain that complaint for more than 5 seconds. It is frivolous, and you know it. It does not matter if a judge dismisses it, William snapped, leaning over the counter again. It matters that it gets filed. It matters that it becomes public record. I know exactly how you built your reputation in Chicago, Rachel. I know that forensic accounting relies entirely on absolute, unimpeachable integrity. You audit other people's messes. You manage high-stakes liquidations. Your clients trust you because your ethical record is spotless. He tapped the manila folder with a manicured finger. What do you think happens to that spotless reputation when a lawsuit is filed claiming you willfully abandoned your elderly parents to be destroyed by the IRS? What happens when I hire a public relations firm to make sure every major business publication in the Midwest gets a copy of that complaint? What happens when I personally call the managing partners of your top 5 corporate clients and tell them that the woman handling their sensitive financial data is currently being sued for elder abuse and financial neglect? Barbara stepped up beside him, her face a mask of manufactured tragedy. We will tell them everything, Rachel. We will tell them how you refused to help us in our darkest hour, how you demanded an invasive, humiliating audit instead of simply providing the loan we desperately needed. We will paint you as a cold, calculating monster who watched her family burn to protect her own bank account. I will tell every client of yours that you left your aging parents to be destroyed by the IRS. William snarled, his voice vibrating with malicious intent. Your career will be dead by Friday. I stared at them, absorbing the absolute staggering depth of their depravity. They were not just trying to steal my money anymore. They were actively threatening to obliterate the professional life I had painstakingly built over the last 8 years. They wanted to drag my name through the mud, to sabotage my client relationships, and to destroy the agency I founded, all to force me into submission. They were willing to scorch the earth just to protect Brittany's luxury lifestyle and their own toxic vanity. Brittany, sensing the shift in power, stepped out from behind our mother. She clutched her silk robe tighter, a triumphant, venomous smile spreading across her face. You should have just signed the papers, Rachel, she taunted, her voice dripping with condescension. You always have to make things so difficult. You always have to push until Dad has to put you in your place. Just sign the collateral agreements and all of this goes away. We get the money, Terrence takes the fall, and you get to keep your little spreadsheet business in Chicago. It is a win-win. I looked at my sister, the golden child who had never faced a single consequence in her entire privileged life. Then I looked at my parents, the enablers who were entirely prepared to destroy one daughter to protect the other. They thought they had cornered me. They thought the threat of public humiliation and professional ruin would break my resolve. They thought I would crumble just like the scared 22-year-old girl they had thrown out into the snow. They were profoundly, disastrously wrong. I picked up the manila folder containing the drafted lawsuit. I opened it, glancing briefly at the legal jargon, the fabricated claims of emotional distress, and the absurd demands for financial compensation. It was a masterpiece of legal fiction, likely drafted by a high-priced attorney who specialized in intimidating vulnerable family members. I closed the folder and held it up, meeting my father's aggressive glare with an expression of absolute terrifying calm. You want to talk about abandonment, William? I asked, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. You want to talk about leaving family members to be destroyed? Let us talk about it. Let us talk about abandonment. Let us talk about the middle of January 8 years ago. Let us talk about the night you decided my demand for the truth was too inconvenient for your perfect family image. I took a slow, deliberate step toward the kitchen island, closing the physical distance between us. Let us talk about how you dragged me out of my bed at 2 in the morning. Let us talk about how you forced me to pack a single bag while Barbara stood in the doorway calling me a jealous, toxic failure. Let us talk about how you drove me to the downtown bus terminal during a historic blizzard, unlocked the car doors, and told me I was dead to you. You did not even wait to see if I made it inside the station. You just drove away, leaving a 22-year-old girl alone in the freezing cold with nothing but the clothes on her back. Barbara flinched, the color draining from her face as the ghost of her past cruelty was dragged into the harsh light of the present. William's jaw tightened, but he did not lower his gaze. That was different, William growled, his voice lacking its previous conviction. You brought that on yourself. You were tearing this family apart with your lies. I was telling the truth. I fired back, my voice rising, the clinical detachment finally cracking to reveal the raw, unyielding anger beneath. And you knew it. You knew Brittany stole my work. You knew she was a fraud. But you chose to abandon me because I refused to play along with your delusion. And now you have the absolute audacity to stand in this kitchen facing federal indictment for her crimes and threaten to sue me for abandonment. I lifted the manila folder and slammed it down onto the marble counter with explosive force. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. File it! I commanded, my eyes blazing with 8 years of suppressed fury. File the lawsuit, William. Call my clients. Call the press. Tell them exactly who I am. Tell them I am the woman who refused to fund a $3 million federal tax fraud. Tell them I am the woman who refused to let an innocent black man be framed and sent to federal prison so your spoiled, thieving daughter could keep her Birkin bag. Please, I am begging you, make this public. Because I promise you, the moment you file that complaint, I will countersue for malicious prosecution, defamation, and extortion. And I will subpoena every single financial record this company has generated in the last decade to prove it. The kitchen descended into a stunned, breathless silence. The threat of professional ruin had backfired spectacularly. I was not backing down. I was daring them to strike. I was inviting the war. I was inviting the war. William stared at me, his jaw slackening as the reality of my counter-threat settled heavily into his chest. The legal folder resting on the marble island no longer looked like a weapon of mass destruction. It looked like a pathetic, desperate bluff. He had expected me to cower at the mere mention of a public scandal. He had entirely underestimated the fact that my professional credibility was built on transparency, while his entire existence relied on hiding in the shadows. A sharp, humorless laugh escaped my throat, echoing loudly against the vaulted ceiling of the kitchen. The sound made Brittany flinch and take another step back. Abandonment. I repeated the word, tasting the absolute irony of it on my tongue. You really had the audacity to sit in a lawyer's office, draft a lawsuit claiming elder abandonment, and plan to serve it to me. Let us talk about what real abandonment looks like, William. Let us talk about the visceral, freezing reality of it. I stepped away from the island and walked slowly toward the large bay windows overlooking the front driveway, my heels clicking methodically on the hardwood. I gestured toward the darkness outside. Abandonment looks like a 22-year-old girl standing on a concrete curb at a downtown bus terminal. At 2 in the morning, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, razor-sharp whisper. Do you remember the temperature that night? It was 14 degrees. The wind chill made it feel like -10. You did not even let me grab my winter coat from the hall closet. You stood by the front door and told me that if I did not walk out immediately, you would call the police and have me arrested for trespassing in my own childhood home. William shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. You were out of control, he muttered defensively. You were tearing the house apart looking for files. I was demanding we check the security cameras, I fired back. pivoting to face him directly. That is all I asked for. One look at the Home Office security footage. I knew Brittany sneaked into the study at midnight while I was sleeping to download my capstone thesis onto her flash drive. I knew the cameras would show her walking out with my intellectual property. I begged you to look at the tapes. I literally fell to my knees in this exact kitchen and begged you to just review the footage before you believed her lies. Barbara gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. We did not need cameras to know the truth, she insisted, though her voice shook with the effort of maintaining her delusion. Brittany was under immense pressure. She was the creative one. You were just trying to sabotage her out of spite. I marched right back to the island, locking eyes with my mother. I was trying to protect my academic career. And what was your response to my demand for basic, undeniable proof? You did not check the cameras. You erased the hard drive the next morning to cover her tracks. And as for me, you let William throw me into the passenger seat of his car, drive me 30 miles into the city during a historic blizzard, and dump me on a sidewalk. The memories hit me like physical blows, but I channeled the pain into pure, unadulterated anger. I did not have a phone because you canceled my cellular plan while I was packing my single duffel bag. I had $40 in my wallet. I sat on a freezing metal bench for 6 hours waiting for the station to open, wondering if I was going to freeze to death while my parents went back to sleep in their heated mansion. I had to drop out of my university program because you called the financial aid office the very next morning and revoked my tuition guarantee, leaving me with thousands in immediate debt. Brittany crossed her arms, rolling her eyes as if listening to a boring movie plot. Oh, please, you survived. You clearly did just fine for yourself. Stop acting like it was a tragedy. You are standing here in a designer suit making millions. You should be thanking us for giving you that push. I turned my predatory gaze onto my sister. I survived because I had no other choice. I worked 3 minimum wage jobs. I cleaned grease traps in a diner until my hands bled. I slept on a mattress on the floor of a studio apartment with 3 other roommates while teaching myself advanced financial modeling from library books. Every single ounce of success I have today was built over the ashes of the life you burned to the ground. I looked back at my father, who was now staring at his expensive shoes. You threw away your own daughter to protect a thief. You chose a comfortable lie over the ugly truth because facing the truth meant admitting your golden child was a failure. You traded my future for her comfort. And now, 8 years later, the absolute poetic justice of it all is standing right in front of you. The thief you protected just stole $3 million from your company, and you are begging the daughter you abandoned to bail you out. This is not about the past, William shouted, his frustration boiling over as he slammed his hand against the marble again. We are facing federal indictment. We made a mistake, fine. We admit it. We were harsh. But you are our blood. You have the money to fix this. You can write a check right now and save this family. Why are you so hell-bent on punishing us? Because you never loved me, I stated, the cold, hard realization settling over the room. You loved the idea of a perfect family. You loved having a scapegoat to blame when things went wrong. You loved Brittany because she reflected your own vanity back at you. But you never loved me. And I will not spend a single cent to save people who would happily leave me to freeze. The air in the kitchen snapped. The careful, manipulative facade Barbara had been maintaining for the last hour finally shattered completely. The polite country club mother vanished, and the vicious, narcissistic woman hiding underneath clawed her way to the surface. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. Because you were always jealous of her, Barbara shrieked, her voice echoing violently off the walls, raw and uncontrolled. She is beautiful and charismatic, and you were just an ugly, bitter girl trying to ruin her shine. The words hung in the suffocating air of the kitchen, sharp and venomous. 8 years ago, that exact sentence would have shattered me. It would have sent me spiraling into a vortex of self-doubt, desperately trying to prove my worth to a woman incapable of maternal love. I would have cried until my lungs burned. I would have begged for her to see my value. I would have apologized for existing just to earn a fraction of the affection she freely showered upon my sister. But standing there now, anchored by the undeniable weight of my own success, I felt absolutely nothing. No tears pricked the corners of my eyes. No sudden lump formed in my throat. The heavy, suffocating chain of a lifetime spent chasing their conditional approval simply evaporated into the cold morning air. The toxic umbilical cord that had tethered my self-worth to their validation was officially and permanently severed. It was a profound, breathtaking release. I was finally free. I looked at Barbara. Her chest was heaving, her eyes wild with the dark adrenaline of her own malice. She was waiting for my reaction. She wanted the twisted satisfaction of watching me break. She wanted the ugly, bitter girl to crumble so she could feel powerful again in a house that was rapidly slipping through her fingers. Beside her, William was breathing heavily, his hands still gripping the marble counter like a vice, while Brittany watched with a sick, twisted sense of victory. I did not give them a single ounce of the emotional reaction they craved. Instead, I stood up, perfectly straight, squaring my shoulders against the opulent backdrop of their collapsing empire. With slow, deliberate movements, I reached down and buttoned my tailored blazer. The simple clinical gesture shifted the entire energy of the room. I was no longer a discarded daughter standing in her childhood home pleading for justice. I was a forensic liquidator examining a worthless, distressed asset that was no longer worth the cost of salvage. I looked at the three of them with absolute clinical detachment. They were no longer my family. They were just desperate, fraudulent strangers drowning in a mess of their own making. They were a bad investment I was permanently writing off. The silence stretched out thick and unbearable. 10 seconds passed, then 20. The total absence of my anger terrified them far more than any screaming match ever could. My parents were experts at navigating chaos and emotional warfare. They thrived on dysfunction. It was their native language. But they had absolutely no defense against pure, unadulterated apathy. Barbara's triumphant sneer began to falter. The color that had rushed to her face during her vicious outburst slowly drained away, leaving her looking haggard, old, and terrified. She realized entirely too late that she had just played her final card and completely missed the target. She had insulted the only person on the planet holding a life raft while the water was already rising above her neck. Rachel Williams started, his voice cracking under the oppressive weight of my silence. He held out a trembling hand, the aggressive businessman persona totally collapsing. Let us just calm down. Let us take a breath. Your mother is under a tremendous amount of stress. We all are. She did not mean what she just said. We are just terrified of losing the legacy we built for this family. I did not argue. I did not demand an apology. I did not waste another breath trying to reason with people wholly committed to their own delusions. Arguing required an emotional investment I was no longer willing to make. Engaging with them meant validating their belief that they still had some level of power over my emotions. They had none. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen illuminated my face in the dim lighting of the kitchen, casting a cold glow over my features. I kept my eyes locked on William as I opened the clock application. With a few swift, practiced taps, I navigated to the timer function. I set the digital dial for exactly 24 hours. I pressed start. I turned the screen around and held the phone up so the bright, glaring numbers were perfectly visible to everyone in the room. The countdown had begun, silently ticking away the final moments of their luxurious, fraudulent lives. 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 50 seconds. Every tick of the digital clock was a hammer striking the final nails into their corporate coffin. "What are you doing?" Brittany asked, her voice trembling uncontrollably as she stared at the shrinking numbers. Her manicured hands gripped the edge of the kitchen island so tightly her knuckles turned a stark, bony white. The realization that her luxury lifestyle was evaporating in real time was finally piercing through her immense arrogance. "Why are you setting a timer? What does that mean?" I lowered the phone and slipped it back into my pocket, keeping my gaze entirely level. "I am not signing anything," I stated, my voice echoing with terrifying absolute finality. "I am not wiring you a single cent. I am not protecting this mansion. I am not saving your corrupt company, and I am certainly not allowing you to frame an innocent man to cover up your felony embezzlement. You built this trap yourselves, and now you get to sit in it. William lunged forward again, panic completely overriding his logic. His hands slapped against the marble, his face twisted in utter desperation. "You cannot do this," he pleaded, his voice rising to a frantic pitch. "We have a week before the feds finalize the seizure warrants. We have time to negotiate. If you do not give us the money now, we will lose everything. We will be ruined. You have to give us time to figure this out." I picked up my leather briefcase from the counter, the finality of the movement signaling the absolute end of the negotiation. I adjusted my grip on the handle, feeling the comforting weight of Terrence's encrypted drive safely hidden in my pocket. I looked at the people who had thrown me away like garbage 8 years ago, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. "And just so you know, I ran a background check on the way here," I said, looking directly into my father's horrified eyes. "Your company's assets were already frozen by the feds at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. You do not have a week. You have until tomorrow. Good luck." I did not wait for my father to process the catastrophic reality of his situation. I did not wait for my mother to cycle through her Rolodex of emotional manipulation to find a new angle. I simply turned my back on the kitchen island, adjusting the strap of my leather briefcase over my shoulder, and began walking toward the heavy oak doors that led to the grand foyer. The spell of my clinical detachment finally broke, and the kitchen erupted into absolute, unadulterated chaos. William let out a primal roar of frustration, sweeping his arm across the marble counter. The stack of collateral agreements, the drafted lawsuit, and Brittany's porcelain espresso cup went flying across the room. The delicate cup shattered against the custom cabinetry, sending a spray of dark liquid and ceramic shards across the pristine hardwood floor. He lunged forward, not to attack me, but driven by the frantic, directionless energy of a cornered animal, realizing the trap had just snapped shut. Brittany shrieked a high-pitched grating sound that vibrated against the windows. She stumbled backward, clutching her silk robe. Her face contorted in sheer terror as the reality of federal prison finally eclipsed her arrogance. She looked at her brand-new Rolex, then at her father, then at the door I was walking toward. "Stop her!" Brittany screamed, pointing a trembling finger at my retreating back. "Dad, do not let her leave. If she walks out that door, we are dead. Make her sign it." Barbara moved with shocking speed for a woman who had just claimed to be an aging, fragile senior citizen. She darted around the island, her heels clicking frantically against the floorboards, and threw her body directly in front of the heavy oak doors. She spread her arms wide physically, barricading the exit, her face a mask of furious desperation. "You are not leaving this house!" "Rachel," Barbara hissed, her chest heaving as she glared at me. "You do not get to walk in here, disrespect this family, and just walk away. We gave you life. We gave you this legacy. You are going to sit down and we are going to figure this out right now. You are going to fix this." I stopped 3 feet from my mother, my expression entirely impassive. "Move, Barbara," I commanded, dropping the title of mother completely. "You have exactly 3 seconds to step aside before I call the local precinct and report a forced detention. And I guarantee the patrol officers who respond will be absolutely thrilled to hand you over to the federal agents waiting for you at dawn." Barbara did not budge. Her eyes were wild, her breathing erratic. She was entirely committed to the delusion that she could still control me through sheer intimidation. William was advancing from behind his heavy footsteps, echoing as he prepared to back his wife's physical barricade. I reached into my pocket, my thumb hovering over the emergency dial function on my phone, preparing to execute the threat. Before I could press the button, a shadow detached itself from the periphery of the kitchen. Terrence moved with a quiet, lethal efficiency that caught everyone off guard. He stepped smoothly between me and my mother, placing his broad shoulders squarely facing Barbara. He did not raise his voice. He did not throw a punch. He simply existed as an immovable physical barrier separating the toxic delusion of my family from my exit path. "Move aside!" Barbara Terrence said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding rumble that commanded absolute obedience. "Rachel is leaving. Now." William stopped dead in his tracks, staring at his son-in-law as if he had grown a second head. For 4 years, they had treated Terrence like a compliant corporate accessory, a man who would silently absorb their disrespect just to remain adjacent to their wealth. They had never seen him assert dominance in their home. "How dare you!" Barbara gasped, her face flushing with indignant rage as she looked up at the man she had just planned to send to federal prison. "This is my house. You work for us. Step aside right this second, Terrence." Terrence did not flinch. He looked down at the woman who had just weaponized his race to guilt-trip her own daughter. "I do not work for you anymore, Barbara," he stated, the quiet dignity of his voice contrasting sharply with her hysterical shrieking. "And this house belongs to the federal government as of 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. Move." He took a slow, deliberate half-step forward, using his physical presence to gently but firmly force my mother to back away from the door. Barbara stumbled backward, her mouth opening and closing in shocked silence. Terrence reached behind his back, grasped the brass handle of the heavy oak door, and pulled it open, gesturing for me to pass. I stepped through the threshold, pausing for a fraction of a second to look back at the chaotic ruin of my family. William was staring at the shattered espresso cup. Brittany was sobbing uncontrollably near the sink. Barbara was trembling with impotent rage. They looked exactly as they were. Bankrupt morally and financially. I looked at Terrence. Our eyes met, a silent transmission of professional respect and shared survival. "Keep your head down," I murmured, ensuring only he could hear. "I will handle the math." I walked down the grand hallway, the heavy front door clicking shut behind me, sealing my family inside their own tomb. The freezing Connecticut air hit my face the moment I stepped onto the expansive front porch, but I did not feel the cold. I felt a surge of pure electric adrenaline. I walked briskly down the sweeping circular driveway, the gravel crunching beneath my heels, until I reached my modest rental car, parked next to William's ostentatious luxury sedan. I unlocked the car, slid into the driver's seat, and immediately hit the electronic locks. I did not turn the key in the ignition. Instead, I reached into the deep pocket of my blazer and pulled out the small encrypted USB drive Terrence had pressed into my palm. The metal casing felt heavy, carrying the weight of a $3 million federal fraud case. I unzipped my leather briefcase, retrieved my high-performance laptop, and set it on the passenger seat. I booted up the machine, the soft glow illuminating the dark interior of the rental car. With clinical precision, I plugged the USB drive into the port. A password prompt immediately flashed across the screen. I typed in the sequence Terrence had quickly murmured to me during our brief exchange in the hallway. The encryption barrier dissolved. The screen populated with dozens of nested folders: raw server data, unredacted wire transfer logs, offshore holding company manifests, casino expenditure reports. I clicked open the primary ledger file. My forensic accountant instincts took over, my eyes rapidly scanning columns of figures tracing the flow of capital from legitimate corporate accounts into personal luxury purchases, offshore gambling syndicates, and high-risk speculative investments. It was all there, every single transaction. Terrence had not just gathered evidence. He had compiled a masterful, irrefutable roadmap of Brittany's embezzlement and William's complicit cover-up. He had documented the falsified digital signatures, the redirected mail routing protocols, and the shadow accounts. It was a federal prosecutor's dream. A slow, terrifying smile spread across my face as the sheer magnitude of their stupidity settled over me. They had handed the keys to their empire to a golden child who used the corporate treasury as a personal piggy bank, and they had alienated the only two people competent enough to save them. I reached for my phone, scrolling past the frantic incoming text messages from my mother, and opened my professional contacts directory. I bypassed the standard corporate liquidators and scrolled down to a very specific high-profile contact. I tapped the screen and held the phone to my ear, listening to the dial tone ring twice before a sharp, awake voice answered despite the early hour. "This is Sterling," the voice said. "Good morning, David," I replied, my voice buzzing with the cold, calculated energy of a predator preparing to strike. "I know it is early, but I need you to initiate a federal filing immediately." Rachel, the bankruptcy attorney, responded, his tone shifting to professional alertness. "It is 3 in the morning. What kind of filing are we talking about?" I want to buy a distressed asset, I stated, my eyes locked on the glowing spreadsheet confirming my family's total financial ruin. Chapter 11. Bankruptcy. Full liquidation acquisition. David paused, the sound of typing echoing faintly over the line. What is the target acquisition? I want to buy my father's company. The 3 days following my departure from Connecticut were an absolute masterclass in aggressive corporate maneuvering. I did not sleep. I did not pause to process the emotional fallout of seeing my family again. Instead, I sat in my Chicago office with David, my lead bankruptcy attorney, and methodically dismantled the financial architecture of my father's import empire. Armed with Terrence's encrypted drive, we bypassed the standard federal audit delays. We presented a comprehensive liquidation acquisition proposal directly to the primary creditors and the federal bankruptcy court. We formed a blind holding company named Vanguard Risk Management. To William and the federal receivers, Vanguard was just another faceless corporate vulture swooping in to buy distressed debt for pennies on the dollar. To me, it was a perfectly crafted guillotine. On Thursday morning, a sleek black town car pulled up to the glass facade of the Federal Bankruptcy Court's annex in downtown Hartford. I was already inside the building, sitting in a private observation room adjacent to the main conference hall. Through the frosted glass partition, I watched my family arrive. They looked absolutely nothing like people on the verge of federal indictment. Barbara wore a pristine, tailored suit, her chin held high as if she were arriving for a charity luncheon rather than a Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing. William adjusted his silk tie, exuding the false confidence of a man who firmly believed he had just outsmarted the United States government. And Brittany walked right between them, carrying that absurd Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag, looking entirely too pleased with herself. They were escorted into Conference Room B, an imposing space dominated by a massive mahogany table and panoramic windows overlooking the city skyline. I listened through the internal intercom system as they settled into the high-backed leather chairs. "I told you it would work out," William said, his voice dripping with arrogant relief. "These risk management firms only care about liquidating the physical warehouse assets. They take the inventory, we take the clean slate. We sign the handover agreements today, and the debt transfers to them." "And what about the federal investigation?" Barbara asked, her tone completely devoid of any real concern for the innocent man they were framing. "Vanguard assumes the corporate liability for the tax debt," William explained confidently, shuffling a stack of useless internal reports. "When the feds come looking for the missing $3 million, we hand them Terrence's forged signature logs. Vanguard gets the tax write-off, and Terrence takes the federal charges. The authorities get their conviction, and we get to walk away without a single scratch on our permanent record. It is perfectly clean." Brittany let out a sharp, cruel laugh, leaning back in her chair and crossing her legs. "I cannot believe Rachel thought she could threaten us. She is probably sitting in her miserable little apartment right now thinking we are getting arrested. We did not need her money anyway. She wanted to play the high and mighty auditor, but we found a real firm to bail us out. Let her keep her spreadsheets." They actually clinked their water glasses together. They were celebrating. They firmly believed that they had successfully dumped their massive financial crimes onto a blind corporate entity and framed an innocent black man in the process. They were convinced they were walking out of this building as free, wealthy citizens ready to start their next fraudulent venture. They had no idea that they had just walked willingly into the jaws of a trap I had designed specifically for them. The door to the conference room opened, and Jonathan Cross, a senior federal bankruptcy attorney, walked in carrying a thick stack of legal binders. He was a no-nonsense litigator who had worked with my firm on dozens of high-profile corporate liquidations. He took his seat at the head of the mahogany table, adjusting his glasses as he looked at the 3 grinning people sitting across from him. "Good morning," Jonathan began, his voice strictly professional. "I have the Chapter 11 asset transfer documents prepared. As you know, Vanguard Risk Management has agreed to acquire the entirety of your corporate debt, including the outstanding federal tax liabilities. We are ready to sign," William said eagerly, reaching for the gold pen resting in the center of the table. "Just point to the dotted line, Jonathan. We are very pleased to be doing business with Vanguard. It is always good to find partners who understand the value of quick, clean liquidations. Jonathan did not slide the documents across the table. Instead, he folded his hands over the binders and looked directly at my father. Before we proceed with the signatures, there is a strict procedural requirement, Jonathan stated. Because this acquisition involves the transfer of active federal tax liabilities, the holding company insists on a direct presentation of the asset audit. They want to ensure total transparency regarding the origin of the debt you are transferring. William waved his hand dismissively. That is fine. We have the internal reports right here. Our former chief financial officer handled all of that before he was terminated. The numbers are all documented. Vanguard does not use internal reports. Jonathan corrected his tone, dropping to a colder register. They use their own independent forensic auditors. Brittany shifted uncomfortably in her leather chair, her smirk faltering slightly as the word auditor hung in the air. Well, where are they then? Can we just get this over with? Jonathan stood up and gestured toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the conference room. They sit smugly at the conference table, entirely unprepared for the absolute destruction heading their way. The federal attorney looks at them and says, "The representative for the holding company buying your liquidation debt is here." The heavy oak doors open. The heavy oak doors swung open with a slow, deliberate glide that felt entirely too loud in the cavernous space of the federal boardroom. Every eye at the mahogany table tracked the movement, expecting to see a team of faceless corporate executives carrying leather portfolios. Instead, they saw me. I stepped through the threshold wearing an impeccable charcoal gray power suit tailored with absolute precision. The sharp clicking of my heels against the polished hardwood floor echoed like the ticking of a metronome counting down their final seconds of freedom. I did not look like the discarded daughter they had banished into a blizzard 8 years ago. I did not look like the desperate woman they had tried to manipulate in their kitchen just 3 days prior. I looked like the absolute manifestation of their financial reckoning. I held my head high, my posture radiating a cold, clinical authority that immediately sucked the oxygen out of the room. But I did not walk in alone. A split second later, Terrence stepped into the boardroom right behind me. The transformation in my brother-in-law was staggering. Gone was the exhausted, defeated man in the frayed collar who had silently endured their racial profiling and endless abuse. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, his jaw set with the unyielding strength of a man who had finally been handed a sword. He wore a sharp, perfectly fitted navy suit, looking every bit the brilliant financial executive he actually was. He locked eyes with Brittany across the length of the table. Her face instantly drained of all color, transforming into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The real shock, however, came a heartbeat later. Stepping through the heavy oak doors immediately behind Terrence were two individuals who permanently altered the atmosphere of the room. They were not lawyers. They were not accountants. They were two federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers, with the bright, bold letters FBI printed across the back. Their gold badges caught the sunlight streaming through the panoramic windows, and the unmistakable outline of standard-issue sidearms rested on their hips. They stepped inside and positioned themselves flanking the doorway, physically blocking the only exit out of the conference room. The silence that fell over the boardroom was absolute and terrifying. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a catastrophic realization. Barbara let out a small, strangled gasp, her manicured hand flying up to cover her mouth. She shrank back into her high-backed leather chair, her eyes darting frantically between me and the federal agents as her pristine country club reality imploded. Brittany looked like she was about to vomit. The smug, arrogant smirk she had been wearing just moments ago melted entirely away, leaving her trembling uncontrollably. She instinctively grabbed the handles of her absurdly expensive crocodile handbag, pulling it onto her lap as if the luxury item could somehow shield her from a federal indictment. William, however, could not process the visual data in front of him. His brain simply refused to accept that the daughter he viewed as a failure had just walked into a federal proceeding backed by federal law enforcement. His ego fought desperately against the collapse of his empire. He looked at Jonathan, the bankruptcy attorney, searching for an explanation that preserved his delusion. Jonathan remained perfectly still, his hands folded neatly over his legal binders, watching the scene unfold with the detached interest of a man who had seen this exact script play out 100 times before. William slammed both his hands flat against the polished mahogany table and shoved his chair back. He stood up, his face flushing that familiar dangerous shade of purple. The veins in his neck strained against his collar as his chest heaved with sudden aggressive indignation. "What is this?" William bellowed, his voice cracking with a mixture of outrage and deep-seated panic. He pointed a trembling finger at me, then at Terrence. "What are they doing here? Where is the buyer from Vanguard? You told me the holding company representatives were coming in to sign the transfer agreements. I demand to know what is going on right now." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match his hysteria. I simply continued my measured, deliberate walk toward the center of the room. I moved past the empty leather chairs, stopping directly across the massive table from my father. I looked him dead in the eyes, maintaining absolute, unwavering eye contact. I unclasped the metal latch of my leather briefcase. I lifted it and dropped it squarely onto the center of the mahogany table. The heavy, resonant thud echoed through the boardroom, silencing my father completely. It was the sound of a gavel coming down. I rested both my hands on the top of the briefcase, leaning slightly forward. The power dynamic had completely irreversibly inverted. He was no longer the dictator of the family legacy. He was just a bankrupt man, standing in front of a federal auditor. "I am the federal forensic liquidator appointed to this case." I stated, my voice ringing with an icy, terrifying clarity. "And I am the sole owner of the holding company that just bought your debt for exactly $1. Will you sign the papers now, William?" The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. William collapsed back into his leather chair. The arrogant patriarch who had demanded my total submission just 3 days ago was entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, breathless shell of a man. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Barbara looked as though she had been physically struck, her hands trembling so violently that her diamond bracelets rattled against the mahogany table. But Brittany could not accept defeat. Her entire existence was built on avoiding accountability, and her survival instincts kicked in with the ferocity of a cornered animal. She sprang to her feet, her chair violently scraping against the hardwood floor. She ignored me completely and whipped around to face the 2 federal agents guarding the doors. "This is a setup!" Brittany shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly in the vast conference room. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at Terrence, tears streaming down her face in a desperate, manufactured display of victimhood. "He is lying to you. My husband is a manipulative, abusive liar. He took that money. He drained the company accounts, and now he is conspiring with my jealous sister to frame me. They hate me. They have always hated me. You have to arrest him. He is the criminal here." She stepped toward the agents, clutching her crocodile handbag to her chest like a shield. She weaponized her tears, putting on the exact same performance she had used since childhood to manipulate our parents out of holding her responsible for her actions. She sobbed, her shoulders heaving, playing the role of the terrified, innocent white woman pleading for protection from the menacing black man who had supposedly destroyed her family. The 2 federal agents did not flinch. They did not reach for their radios. They did not step forward to comfort her. They remained standing with their hands clasped in front of them, their expressions entirely stoic, completely immune to her theatrics. I did not yell. I did not tell her to shut up. Arguing with a narcissist in the middle of a meltdown is a waste of breath. I simply reached into my briefcase, pulled out my high-performance laptop, and set it on the table. I plugged in the video cable resting in the center console. I reached over to the room control panel and pressed a single button. The motorized blackout blinds descended smoothly over the panoramic windows, plunging the bright boardroom into a cool, cinematic darkness. A massive projector screen lowered from the ceiling at the far end of the table. The projector hummed to life, casting a stark, blindingly bright square of light across the room. Brittany stopped screaming, blinking against the sudden brightness. "Numbers do not scream, Brittany," I said, my voice cutting through the dark room with absolute, unyielding authority. Numbers do not cry. They do not manipulate. They just leave a perfect, undeniable trail of evidence. I tapped the spacebar on my laptop. The first slide illuminated the screen. It was a side-by-side comparison. On the left was the falsified financial report William had submitted to the bankruptcy court. On the right was the unredacted raw general ledger extracted directly from the encrypted USB drive. Let us look at the anatomy of your supposed rough patch. I began pacing slowly at the head of the table. You claim Terrence made bad investments that sank the company, but the raw data tells a very different story. I clicked to the next slide. A massive web of offshore bank accounts appeared linking directly to a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands under a deeply obscured holding company. Between March and November of last year, over $1.2 million was diverted from the corporate payroll tax fund into these offshore accounts. I explained using a laser pointer to trace the red lines on the screen. The holding company is registered to a proxy agent, but the routing numbers trace directly back to a private wealth management account. Your personal account, Brittany. That is a lie, Brittany gasped, backing away from the table. Anyone could have set that up. He stole my identity. I ignored her and clicked to the next slide. A detailed list of wire transfers appeared complete with dates, timestamps, and recipient institutions. Let us talk about your business trips, I continued. You took 7 supposed vendor networking trips to Las Vegas in the past 14 months. According to the corporate expense reports, you were meeting with international suppliers. But according to the encrypted wire transfers Terrence managed to intercept, you were routing hundreds of thousands of dollars directly into the high roller accounts at 3 different luxury casinos. You did not just lose the money at the tables, Brittany. You used the casino chips to wash the corporate funds, cashing out the balances into your private offshore accounts to avoid federal tax flags. Barbara gasped, pressing her hands to her cheeks as the sheer magnitude of her daughter's criminality was projected in high definition for the federal agents to see. William slumped lower in his chair, refusing to look at the screen. I clicked the presentation forward again. This time, high-resolution photographs of luxury real estate deeds appeared. When you were not busy laundering payroll taxes through casino vaults, you were purchasing assets, I stated coldly. 2 luxury condominiums in Miami, a ski chalet in Aspen, all purchased entirely in cash using the exact same offshore routing numbers. You literally bought a crocodile handbag with the money meant to pay your employees' health insurance premiums. Brittany was shaking her head violently, retreating until her back hit the mahogany-paneled wall. You cannot prove I authorized those transfers. Terrence was the chief financial officer. He had the security tokens. He signed off on every single one of those wire movements. The digital logs show his credentials. He is the one who approved it all. I smiled. It was a sharp, predatory smile that made my sister visibly shudder. I had been waiting for her to play that exact card. I tapped the spacebar one final time. The screen shifted to a highly magnified view of the internal corporate authorization logs. It showed the digital signatures required to move any capital over $50,000. The name Terrence was stamped across the approval line in bright green text. You are right, Brittany, I said softly, the silence in the room amplifying my words. The digital logs do show Terrence's credentials. They show his password and his security token being used to authorize the theft of $3 million. I turned to look directly at my father, who had gone completely rigid. But forensic accounting is not just about reading signatures. It is about reading the metadata. I pointed the laser at a string of code buried beneath the digital signature block. I extracted the IP addresses and the geolocation data for every single one of these supposedly authorized transfers. Terrence didn't sign these. William did to cover up his golden child's felony embezzlement. The undeniable truth of that statement hung in the chilled air of the boardroom. I tapped the keyboard one final time, bringing up a side-by-side geographic map. Red dots pinpointed the exact origins of the login requests. Every single time Terrence supposedly authorized a massive offshore wire transfer, his security token was pinged from the IP address associated with your private members. Only golf club, I stated, staring down my father. And on the dates, the casino funds were cleared, the approvals originated from the secure network inside your own home office. Meanwhile, corporate travel logs and commercial flight manifests proved Terrence was thousands of miles away, conducting actual business on behalf of your dying company. William opened his mouth, his lips trembling, but no sound materialized. The blustering, arrogant patriarch who had threatened to ruin my career was utterly destroyed. He slumped forward, bracing his elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. He knew the federal agents standing at the door had just seen irrefutable proof of wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The two FBI agents stepped forward in perfect, terrifying synchronization. Their heavy boots thudded loudly against the hardwood floor. They did not shout or draw their weapons, but the subtle shift in their posture signaled the end of the presentation. They were moving in to secure the suspects. The sound of their approaching footsteps acted as a violent trigger. Brittany looked at the federal agents, then at her father, who was refusing to look at her, and finally at the damning data projected brightly on the wall. Her fragile manufactured reality fractured completely. The pampered golden child, who had spent 30 years having every mistake erased and every consequence swept under the rug by her enabling parents, suffered a total psychological collapse. She went feral. A guttural, animalistic shriek ripped from her throat, a sound so raw and unhinged it made Barbara scream in response. Brittany hurled her $100,000 crocodile handbag across the room, the heavy hardware smashing into the glass partition. She scrambled onto the top of her leather chair, her designer heels digging into the upholstery, and launched herself completely across the polished mahogany table. She clawed frantically at the air, knocking over crystal water glasses and scattering legal binders, her eyes wide with homicidal rage as she aimed directly for my face. I did not even flinch. I did not take a single step back. I stood perfectly still, watching the violent implosion of my sister. Before her grasping, manicured hands could reach within 3 feet of me, Terrence moved. He did not just step in front of me. He intercepted her with the smooth, calculated precision of a man who had spent years anticipating this exact moment of madness. He caught her by the shoulders, his broad frame absorbing the impact of her wild lunge with absolute ease. He planted his feet firmly, acting as an immovable physical wall between my sister and her target. "Let me go!" Brittany shrieked, thrashing violently against his grip. She kicked at the mahogany table and twisted her body, trying desperately to break free. "You work for us. You are nothing without this family. I will ruin you. Get out of my way and let me kill her." Terrence did not raise his voice. He did not yell back or match her frantic, flailing energy. His face was a mask of cold, unyielding stone. For 4 years he had endured her toxic narcissism, her reckless spending, and her family's thinly veiled racial prejudice. He had played the dutiful husband while she secretly plotted to frame him and send him to a federal penitentiary. Now the debt was coming due. He shoved her backward with just enough forceful momentum to send her tumbling off the table. Brittany landed hard on her feet, stumbling back into the empty chairs, gasping for breath as she glared at him with pure venomous hatred. "You are going to regret this," she hissed, pointing a shaking finger at his chest. "I will take everything from you. I will take the house, I will take the cars, and I will make sure you never see Leo again. You will die alone in a prison cell while my father pays the best lawyers in the country to bury you." Terrence reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored navy suit jacket. He did not look angry. He looked profoundly, beautifully liberated. He pulled out a thick manila folder, the edges crisp and pristine. He stepped forward and slapped the folder forcefully against Brittany's chest, forcing her to instinctively grab it before it hit the floor. Brittany looked down at the heavy envelope, her chest heaving, confusion momentarily overriding her homicidal rage. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice cracking. Terrence adjusted his tie, looking down at the woman who had tried to destroy his life. He delivered the final crushing blow with surgical, chilling precision. "Those are divorce papers," Terrence said coldly. "And an emergency order for full custody of my son granted by a judge this morning based on your felony fraud." Brittany stopped breathing. Her eyes dropped to the folder in her hands, reading the stark black lettering of the family court seal stamped across the front page. I filed the petition the moment Rachel confirmed the financial audit was secured. Terrence continued his tone, merciless and clinical. The judge reviewed the raw financial data of your offshore accounts. He saw the wire transfers to the underground gambling syndicates. He saw the documented evidence that you were actively preparing to frame a federal crime on your own husband. The court deemed you a severe flight risk and an immediate psychological danger to a minor child. Barbara let out a horrifying wail, dropping to her knees beside the table. "No," she sobbed, grasping at Terrence's pant leg. "You cannot take my grandson. You cannot take Leo away from his mother." Terrence looked down at my mother, his eyes completely devoid of sympathy. "He is not your grandson anymore, Barbara. He is my son, and I will not allow him to be raised in a house that grooms children to be thieves, liars, and corporate criminals. You lost the right to see him the moment you agreed to send his father to a federal penitentiary to cover your own daughter's debts." Brittany's hands began to shake so violently the heavy manila folder slipped from her grasp, hitting the floor with a dull thud. She looked at Terrence, searching his face for any hint of the compliant, quiet man she thought she had married. She found nothing but cold, fortified steel. She had lost her wealth, her freedom, and now her child. The golden child had absolutely nothing left. The heavy manila folder lay on the floor, a stark white rectangle against the dark mahogany. The silence in the federal boardroom was absolute, broken only by the sharp, ragged breathing of my mother on her knees and the heavy, synchronized footsteps of the two FBI agents moving in. They had given the family their moment of domestic reckoning, allowing Terrence to deliver his devastating blow and secure his son's future. Now it was the federal government's turn. The lead agent, a tall man with a closely cropped haircut and eyes completely devoid of any sympathy, stepped around the massive conference table. He did not address my parents. He did not ask for permission. He walked directly up to my sister, who was still staring at the divorce papers on the ground, as if they were written in an alien language. "Brittany," the agent said, his voice carrying the booming, unyielding authority of federal law enforcement, "we have a warrant for your arrest on multiple counts of wire fraud, tax evasion, and corporate embezzlement." The words struck Brittany like physical blows. Her head snapped up, her eyes wild, bloodshot, and unfocused. She looked at the agent's gold badge gleaming on his jacket, then down at the heavy black handcuffs he was unclipping from his utility belt. "No," she whispered, stumbling backward until her spine hit the mahogany-paneled wall. "No, you do not understand. My father is going to fix this. We are fixing it right now. We are selling the debt. You cannot arrest me. I am a victim here." The agent did not slow his approach. He reached out firmly, grasping her shoulder and turning her around with practiced, undeniable force. "Put your hands behind your back, ma'am," he ordered. Brittany let out a terrified, guttural shriek. She tried to yank her arm away, twisting her body to face our father. "Dad, do something," she screamed, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. "Call the lawyers. Tell them they cannot do this to me. Tell them who we are." But William could do nothing. The wealthy, powerful executive who had ruled our family through intimidation and financial manipulation was paralyzed. He was completely neutralized by the undeniable proof of his own complicity projecting on the wall behind me. The agent secured her right wrist, bringing her arm behind her back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuff ratcheting shut echoed through the room. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of absolute, irrevocable consequence. "You have the right to remain silent." The second agent began moving into a protective stance to ensure the arrest proceeded without physical interference. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The physical reality of the steel cuffs finally penetrated Barbara's shock. Seeing her golden child, the perfect, flawless daughter she had sacrificed me to protect, being shackled like a common street criminal, completely broke her mind. She scrambled up from the floor, her tailored designer suit wrinkled, and her expensive diamond bracelets clanking violently as she threw herself toward the agents. "Get your hands off my daughter," Barbara shrieked, her voice morphing into a hysterical, screeching pitch that hurt my ears. "You are making a mistake. She is not a criminal. We are prominent citizens. We donate to the police benevolent fund. You cannot treat us like thugs." She lunged forward, her hands outstretched like claws, attempting to physically grab Brittany's arm and pull her away from the federal agent. It was a humiliating, pathetic display of a woman who genuinely believed her social status placed her completely above the law. The second agent reacted with lightning speed. He stepped squarely into Barbara's path, raising his hands and using his broad physical bulk to block her advance. "Step back, ma'am," he commanded, his voice sharp, loud, and incredibly dangerous. "If you interfere with a federal arrest, I will put you in handcuffs right next to her for obstruction of justice. Stand down immediately." The direct threat of her own arrest made Barbara freeze, but it did not stop her mouth. She stood inches from the agent, weeping uncontrollably, expensive mascara running down her flushed, ruined cheeks. "We will sue you," she sobbed, completely unhinged and shaking from head to toe. "We will sue the entire bureau. My husband plays golf with the governor. We will have your badges for this. You are ruining our lives." The agent did not even blink. "Ma'am, take a seat right now or you will be detained." Brittany was hyperventilating, sobbing loudly, as the first agent secured her left wrist and completed the reading of her Miranda rights. The illusion of the untouchable golden child was entirely shattered. She was no longer a wealthy socialite. She was just a terrified, bankrupt fraud crying in a federal building, wearing a silk blouse and a pair of cold steel handcuffs. Jonathan, the bankruptcy attorney, sat quietly at the head of the table. He was methodically packing his legal binders back into his briefcase, watching the chaotic scene unfold with the clinical detachment of a man who dealt in facts, not feelings. Terrence stood tall, his posture completely relaxed for the first time in years. He did not look at his screaming wife or his hysterical mother-in-law. He looked directly at me across the massive room, giving a single subtle nod of profound gratitude. The nightmare he had been living was finally over. He was free, his name was cleared, and his son was safe from their toxic grip. I remained standing near the projector screen, watching the absolute destruction of the empire that had cast me out into the cold snow 8 years ago. The agents began marching Brittany toward the heavy oak doors. She dragged her feet, looking back over her shoulder, weeping and begging for our father to save her from the nightmare. But William did not look at her. He slowly pushed himself up from his leather chair, his hands trembling violently as he gripped the edge of the mahogany table for support. His face was a sickly, ashen gray, all the aggressive bullying color completely drained away. He looked hollow, aged by an entire decade in the span of 20 minutes. He turned his head slowly, ignoring the frantic screams of his wife and his favorite daughter, and locked his defeated, devastated eyes onto mine. "You planned this," William said, his voice a hoarse, rattling whisper that barely carried over Barbara's continuous sobbing. "You destroyed your own sister." I looked back at him, my expression radiating cold, unwavering serenity. I did not flinch, and I did not feel a single drop of pity. "No," I replied, my voice echoing with final, absolute truth. "I just finally did the math." The heavy oak doors swung shut behind the federal agents, cutting off the frantic, muffled sounds of Brittany being marched down the marble corridor. The resounding click of the brass latch locking into place was the final, undeniable punctuation mark on my sister's luxurious, fraudulent existence. She was gone. The golden child, the untouchable heir to the family empire, was currently being shoved into the back of a federal vehicle. Terrence did not linger to gloat or watch the aftermath. He picked up his battered leather briefcase, the one wrapped in black duct tape, and gave me a final, resolute nod of profound gratitude. He walked out of the conference room a free man, a father who had just secured his son's future and severed his ties to a living nightmare. He left my parents and me in the suffocating silence of the boardroom. Barbara remained on the floor, her hands pressed against the polished hardwood where her favorite daughter had just been standing in shackles. Her expensive designer suit was bunched and wrinkled, ruined by her hysterical thrashing. She stared at the closed doors, her chest heaving with jagged, irregular breaths. William was in no better shape. The sheer gravity of his absolute ruin finally crushed the last remaining pillars of his arrogant pride. His legs gave out completely. He did not just sit down. He collapsed into the leather executive chair, sliding down until his knees hit the floor. The great, intimidating patriarch of the family was reduced to a hyperventilating broken shell of a man kneeling on the carpet of a federal building. Jonathan, the federal bankruptcy attorney, remained seated at the head of the conference table. He had quietly finished packing his legal binders, but stayed in his chair watching the spectacle unfold in stunned silence. In his decades of practicing federal law, he had seen wealthy executives cry, yell, and threaten violence when their assets were seized. But he had never seen a pair of arrogant high society socialites fall to their knees and crawl across a boardroom floor. His silent clinical observation amplified their total public humiliation. They had no pride left to salvage. The panic in the room suddenly pivoted. The shock of Brittany's arrest began to clear, replaced by the terrifying realization of their own immediate reality. They were entirely bankrupt. The mansion was gone. The corporate accounts were seized. Their country club friends were about to watch them be publicly decimated in the press. But then a frantic, desperate light ignited in William's bloodshot eyes. He looked up at me, his brain desperately trying to calculate a way out of the abyss. "You own the debt." William choked out his voice, a hoarse, rattling wheeze. He dragged himself forward on his knees, crawling across the hardwood floor toward where I stood. "You are Vanguard. You are the holding company. You bought the $3 million liability from the government." Barbara snapped her head toward me, her tear-streaked face twisting with sudden manic hope. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. I was not just their discarded daughter anymore. I was their primary creditor. I held the deed to their mansion. I owned the remains of their corporate legacy. The power dynamic was so absolute that it shattered whatever was left of her maternal superiority. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, ignoring the pain as her bare legs scraped against the floorboards. She threw herself at my feet, reaching out to grasp the hem of my tailored blazer. Her manicured fingers clawed desperately at the fabric, anchoring herself to the only lifeline she had left in the world. "Please, Rachel," Barbara sobbed, her voice cracking with raw, unadulterated terror. "Please, I am begging you. We are a family. Blood is thicker than water. You own the debt, you can drop the charges, you can save the house." William nodded frantically, his hands clasped together in a pathetic gesture of prayer as he knelt right beside her. "We were wrong, Rachel. We admit it. We made a terrible mistake 8 years ago. We were blind. We let Brittany manipulate us, and we punished you for it. But you proved your point. You won. You beat us. You showed us exactly how brilliant and capable you are. You do not have to destroy us to prove you are the better daughter." He reached out his shaking hands, hovering just inches from my shoes. "Just sign the release forms," William pleaded, his voice breaking into a pathetic whine. "Tell the federal receiver you are dropping the civil claims against the corporate officers. You own the assets now, so you can stop the foreclosure on the estate. You can save us from living on the streets. We will do anything you want. We will make it up to you. Just please do not let them take our home." I stood perfectly still, looking down at the two people who had terrorized my entire childhood and dictated my worth based on their toxic vanity. I did not pull my blazer away from my mother's grasping hands. I wanted to feel the frantic, desperate weight of her submission. I wanted to burn this exact image into my memory so I would never ever doubt my decisions again. For 33 years I had craved their validation. I had worked myself to the bone, chasing academic awards and professional accolades, hoping that one day they would look at me with pride instead of disdain. I had wanted them to love me. Now they were on their knees weeping at my feet, offering me the validation I had once begged for. But it was entirely worthless. They were not apologizing because they felt remorse for leaving a 22-year-old girl to freeze at a bus station in the middle of the night. They were not apologizing for enabling a toxic, narcissistic thief who tried to frame an innocent black man for her crimes. They were apologizing because they were staring down the barrel of total financial annihilation. They were begging the banker, not the daughter. I looked at Barbara's ruined, tear-stained face. I looked at William's pathetic, groveling posture. They had stripped me of my dignity, my inheritance, and my family, throwing me to the wolves and expecting me to die in the cold. But the wolf they threw me to was the reality of the corporate world, and I had returned as the leader of the pack. Rachel looks down at the people who discarded her. The ultimate moment of closure has arrived. I look down at Barbara and William kneeling on the floor of the federal boardroom. They were entirely broken, their perfectly curated lives stripped away in less than 30 minutes. Their tears were real, but they were born from the terror of consequences, not the pain of regret. They were mourning their mansion, their country club memberships, and their social standing. They were not mourning me. Barbara reached out again, her fingers brushing the hem of my trousers. "Rachel, please!" she sobbed, looking up with bloodshot eyes. "You can stop this. We will give you anything. We will rewrite the will. We will make you the sole heir to whatever is left. We will grovel to your clients. We will do whatever you want. Just do not let them take the house. Do not let us be homeless. We are your family. We are your blood." I took a slow, deliberate step back, severing the physical contact. I did not raise my voice. I did not clench my fists. I let the absolute freezing calm of vindication wash over me. "Family is an investment," I stated, my voice echoing with pristine clarity in the large room. William flinched. He recognized the phrase instantly. It was the exact sentence he had spoken to me 8 years ago when he locked the front door of my childhood home. "You made it very clear I wasn't worth your capital." I continued, my gaze locking onto his horrified face. "You evaluated my worth based on how easily I could be controlled and decided to write me off. You put all your shares into Brittany and her stock just crashed. I have no obligation to pay dividends on your stupidity." "But she is your sister," Barbara wailed, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. "How can you be so merciless to your own sister? She is going to federal prison." I looked at my mother, feeling a profound sense of closure. "She is going to federal prison because she stole $3 million, I corrected. "And you are losing your house because you tried to frame an innocent man to cover it up. That is not me being merciless, Barbara. That is just math. You gambled your entire legacy on a golden child who lacked basic moral integrity, and the house always wins." William bowed his head, his shoulders shaking as he wept silently into his hands. The man who had terrorized his family for decades had nothing left but the crushing realization of his own absolute failure. He had built his empire on manipulation and lies, and it had crumbled exactly as it was destined to. I turned my attention to Jonathan, the federal bankruptcy attorney, who was still observing the scene with clinical detachment. "The asset transfer is complete, Jonathan," I said, my professional persona snapping back into place. "Vanguard Risk Management now officially holds the debt and the remaining physical assets of the corporation. Please instruct the receivers to proceed with immediate liquidation. I want the warehouse inventory sold, the corporate headquarters auctioned, and the personal assets listed as collateral seized by the end of the week." Jonathan nodded smoothly, picking up his briefcase. "Understood. The receivers will execute the seizure warrants by noon tomorrow." I looked back down at my parents. They were sobbing openly now, clinging to each other on the hardwood floor. They had nothing left to bargain with. Their manipulation tactics were useless against a daughter who had spent 8 years learning to live entirely without them. They were finally permanently powerless. I turned my back on them. I did not offer a final insult. I did not deliver a dramatic parting monologue. The complete absence of my emotional investment was the ultimate punishment. I simply walked toward the heavy oak doors, my heels clicking methodically against the floorboards. Terrence fell into step beside me. He carried his battered leather briefcase, the one wrapped in duct tape, but his posture was entirely transformed. He walked with the steady, quiet dignity of a man who had navigated a living nightmare and emerged with his soul intact. He had his son, his freedom, and a future unburdened by toxic in-laws. We stepped out of the boardroom and into the bright marble corridor of the federal annex. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind us, silencing the frantic, pathetic sobbing of William and Barbara. It was over. The empire had fallen, the golden child was in federal custody, and the scapegoat had walked away with the keys. We walked in silence toward the elevators. The adrenaline that had fueled me for the last 3 days began to recede, replaced by a profound, settling exhaustion. It was not the exhaustion of defeat, but the satisfying weariness that follows a grueling, victorious marathon. Terrence pressed the elevator button. He looked at me, his dark eyes radiating absolute respect. Thank you, he said simply, for actually looking at the files, for not letting them bury me. I looked back at him, offering a small, genuine smile. You handed me a loaded gun, Terrence. I just pulled the trigger. Take care of Leo. Raise him better than they raised us. He nodded, a fierce determination settling over his features. I will. You can count on that. The elevator doors chimed and slid open. We stepped inside, the metal doors closing smoothly, separating us permanently from the chaotic ruin we had left on the floor above. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, I took a deep, steadying breath. I had faced the monsters of my past, dismantled their power, and reclaimed my absolute autonomy. The Federal Annex lobby was bright and bustling with morning activity. Lawyers, clerks, and clients moved with hurried purpose, entirely oblivious to the corporate assassination that had just taken place upstairs. I walked through the revolving doors and stepped out into the crisp, cool air of downtown Hartford. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. I had a flight to catch back to Chicago. I had a thriving forensic accounting firm to run, and I had an entirely new, incredibly lucrative corporate liquidation to manage. I hailed a cab, sliding into the back seat and giving the driver the airport address. I leaned back against the leather upholstery, closing my eyes and letting the absolute breathtaking silence of true independence wash over me. 6 months later, the federal justice system delivered its absolute and final verdict on the Golden Child. The transition from the harsh Connecticut winter to a humid, stifling summer perfectly mirrored the collapse of my family's remaining delusions. Brittany pled guilty to multiple felony counts of wire fraud and tax evasion to avoid a highly publicized trial that she had zero mathematical chance of winning. The federal judge showed no leniency for her tears, sentencing her to 5 years in a minimum security federal correctional institution. It was not a violent facility, but for a woman who had based her entire self-worth on luxury brands and social superiority, it was an absolute living hell. She traded her $100,000 crocodile handbags for a canvas laundry sack and her custom silk robes for an itchy government-issued khaki uniform. There were no offshore accounts left to bail her out, and no enabling parents powerful enough to shield her from the terrifying reality of a federal cell block. Without Brittany to coddle, and without a corporate empire to hide behind, William and Barbara inevitably turned on each other. The IRS did not just seize the sprawling suburban mansion. They ruthlessly auctioned off the luxury sedans, the fine art collection, and the diamond jewelry that had not already been pawned to pay for their criminal defense attorneys. My parents were unceremoniously expelled from their exclusive country club, permanently shunned by the charity boards they once commanded, and utterly blacklisted by the Connecticut elite they had spent decades trying to impress. They currently rent a cramped, poorly insulated 2-bedroom apartment situated directly above a noisy 24-hour commercial laundromat. William was forced to take a job as a mid-level shift manager at a regional logistics hub, spending his days taking orders from regional directors half his age. Barbara spends her days aggressively scrolling through social media on a cracked smartphone, bitterly watching her former friends attend galas and vacations that she will never again be invited to. They have absolutely nothing left but their mutual resentment and a mountain of unresolved legal fees. Terrence, on the other hand, thrived in the aftermath of the explosion. He officially finalized his divorce and retained absolute, uncontested full custody of Leo. Armed with a pristine professional resume and a glowing formal letter of recommendation from the federal bankruptcy trustee I appointed, he accepted a highly lucrative position as chief financial officer for a rapidly expanding tech firm in Austin, Texas. He moved his son thousands of miles away from the toxic, manipulative reach of his former in-laws. We spoke on the phone last week. He told me he finally threw away his duct-taped briefcase and bought a new one. He told me Leo is enrolled in a fantastic preschool playing youth soccer and finally laughing like a normal, carefree 4-year-old boy. Terrence sounded remarkably peaceful. He sounded like a father who had fought a terrifying war for his child and definitively won. As for me, I did not keep the family empire. I am a forensic liquidator, and I did exactly what I do best. I liquidated it entirely. I auctioned the warehouse inventory to overseas distributors. I sold the commercial real estate to a massive industrial developer. I even authorized the liquidation of the heavy mahogany conference table where my parents had dropped to their knees and cried at my feet. I sold the business down to the very last office chair and stapler. The family legacy that William and Barbara had prized above their own daughter was systematically dismantled, categorized, and converted into cold, hard capital. I am standing right now in my new corner office on the 50th floor of a high-rise in downtown Chicago. The floor-to-ceiling windows offer a spectacular, unobstructed panoramic view of the city skyline. I walk over to my custom glass desk and run my fingers over a polished bronze plaque resting near my computer monitor. It bears the name of the Vanguard Foundation. I took the net profits from the complete liquidation of my father's company and poured them directly into a massive privately managed trust. The foundation provides full-ride academic scholarships and emergency living stipends exclusively to college students who have been financially cut off or abandoned by abusive narcissistic parents. Every single time a student graduates using those funds, another piece of my parents' toxic legacy is actively converted into an instrument of profound, generational healing. I took the capital they used to control and terrorize me and I weaponized it to set other victims free. I pick up my ceramic mug, the steam curling softly from the dark roast coffee inside. I take a slow, deliberate sip, feeling the comforting warmth spread through my chest. I look out over the sprawling, infinite expanse of the city below me. The sky is a brilliant, blinding blue, completely clear of any storms. I am 33 years old. I am a highly successful forensic accountant. And as I stand here looking at the empire I built with my own two hands, I know that I am completely, irrevocably free. The most profound lesson from this story is that your worth is never defined by the people who try to exploit you. Rachel's journey teaches us that toxic family bonds built on manipulation and conditional love do not have to dictate your future. Instead of succumbing to her parents' blackmail, she used her independence to dismantle their fraudulent empire and build a legacy of generational healing. You have the absolute right to walk away from people who drain your emotional and financial capital. Reclaim your power and start investing in your own peace. What toxic cycle are you breaking today? Let me know in the comments below.